inadequate data availability and transparency, as well as lack of clear roles and responsibilities, and sometimes also, unfortunately, lack of cooperation among the stakeholders. So this was all addressed in the reform, which was already introduced. It was the objective to have capable and sustainable institutions, to improve water supply and sanitation, to have better quality for the Palestinian population, to use the limited, very scarce resources in a more sustainable manner, and also to improve water demand management and public health through this. So this is, for example, a quotation of the chair of my partner organization. It's improving water and wastewater services in Palestine is imperative for building the Palestinian state and for improving the quality of life for millions of Palestinians. So just to summarize briefly, the outcome of the water law and of the reform is a separation of policy level from the other functions, the establishment of the Water Sector Regulatory Council, which is my partner organization, the transformation of the West Bank Water Department, which is now still inside PWA, to the National Water Company, and also, as we heard from Siad Fukaha, the establishment of the regional water utilities and water user associations in the agricultural sector for the reuse of the treated wastewater. So as the main topic is fragile environment, conflict-sensitive water management, I would also like to talk shortly about the fragile environment we face in Palestine, which is, as I said before, the Israeli occupation. We don't have an independent Palestinian state which can apply the full mandate a state has, a government has, which means limited legitimization of the government, for example, Area C, which is most of the part of the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority doesn't have any authority at all, limited public services, which are influenced by this, insecurity and uncertainty for the development of the Palestinian territories, especially for water management, which deals with timeframes for 30, 40 years maybe, is a very difficult situation. Then fragility also means limited rule of law and law enforcement, and as we said before, again highlighted the fragmentation of the territory and the sector in a whole. So for water management, this means to be especially sensitive about the context you're working in. Also for programming, for example, for the technical cooperation. You have to understand the context, the intergroup tensions, to make sure that you don't further exacerbate and influence the tensions. Then you also have to understand the interaction between your program, what you're actually doing, and this intergroup tensions, and act upon this understanding to minimize the potential conflicts as much as possible. And also in terms of programming for donors, it's important to be proactive and reactive to keep flexible upon what's happening in this fragile and uncertain environment. So in water management, it's on the one hand a contributor to conflict, a casualty of conflict, but it can be also an integral factor in conflict prevention, peace building, and reconciliation. Because what we see in conflicts all around the world is that water is just necessary for everybody, and still in times of strong conflict, still people and conflicting parties negotiate over water and come together on a table to talk about it. So it's also a possibility. And in line with this, the German Development Corporation identified several peace-building needs for the context in Palestine, which is, for example, social cohesion, as fragmentation is seen everywhere and felt everywhere. Then the strengthening of the legitimacy of the Palestinian Authority and the local government units, which involves, for example, also the improvement of the local services, which will increase the acceptance of the population, and the avoidance of deterioration, further deterioration of the socioeconomic conditions. And we, as a water program in Palestine, we took those peace-building needs and did a workshop to see how can we actually implement this as GIZ in Palestine, and came up with especially the following 3 issues, which is definitely multi-level approach, and also especially support to smaller water service providers. As we heard about the clustering of regional water utilities, it's also important to bring the water service providers on a similar level in order to make the clustering possible and also to reach the population, especially also marginalized communities, what we're talking about in a fragile context. Then also to improve stakeholder communication, especially work on awareness and mediated dialogue, as well as equity principles and fair distribution and social inclusion. I mean, I'm not sure how much you're aware of the situation in Palestine, but for example, the groundwater has many different levels in different areas. So some of the communities have a lot of water, have a low water price, and other communities in the south of Palestine, they get water every 3 months. And in summer, the situation is even worse. So especially fair distribution and equity principles is also a huge task and challenge for the water sector in Palestine. So to shortly present the water program itself, it started more than 20 years ago in the water sector in Palestine, and of course had different stages of development. In the beginning, for example, it focused more on increasing the water resources as such, or the wells and the water availability from the groundwater. Then the second and third phase was more specifically focusing on enhancing water service provision, working directly with several water service providers. For example, Nablus, Jerusalem Water Undertaking, Tulkarem, and Bethlehem. And now, since 2014, specifically since the new water law, we were asked to focus more on supporting the water sector reform. And this is also something which is very important in a fragile environment. The key to success is to constantly adapt to the situation, as I said, proactively and reactively, to see what the partners actually want and in which direction you can support them. So the current phase of the water program, we're focusing on the one hand on the water supply and wastewater services, but also at the same time on a national level on the institutional development of the Palestinian Water Authority and the Water Sector Regulatory Council, the promotion of gender equality in the water sector, and also important part, the knowledge exchange, training, and networking among the more than 300 water service providers, also to make them resilient and to make them capable to help themselves, because there are many resources and there are many capacities, but sometimes the water service providers don't know about it themselves, as the amount is just too big to have the overview. So, for example, if we talk about the institutional support to the national institutions, we speak about implementing bylaws, accompanying stakeholder consultation processes, communication activities, and outreach, and, for example, also the formulation of a roadmap for the establishment of the new regulator according to the Water Law 2014. This was accompanied by a technical working group between GIZ, the Water Sector Regulatory Council, and the Palestinian Water Authority, as the regulatory functions were previously with inside PWA and a lot of capacity was there already, which was, as much as possible, transferred to the Water Sector Regulatory Council. This was especially done on issues like performance monitoring and tariff calculation and adjustment processes, like some of the core regulatory functions. This is also still a very strong component in the water sector program. For example, the annual performance monitoring report, which is now collecting data from 64 water service providers in the West Bank and Gaza, which is also a big achievement because Gaza is still another part of the big territorial fragmentation of the Palestinian territories. Then another achievement was the awareness of the performance monitoring for the water service providers themselves, so that they actually can use the report, the data collected, the analysis, and the recommendations to improve themselves, but at the same time also to use it for investment decisions. Then a tariff toolbox was created and used to calculate until now 12 tariffs for water service providers, and also the regulatory capacities on those two issues, performance monitoring and tariff, have been improved and built up. Of course, one of the most important parts still in water sector is to enhance the management and the efficiency of the water service providers themselves. So part of the multi-level approach is always the direct work with the water service providers. For example, in this phase of the program on non-revenue water diagnosis and reduction action plans, and improving collection efficiency and cost recovery. For example, one of the achievements was that we managed to reach out, as you can see on the map, we managed to reach out to many water service providers, medium and also small-scale water service providers. We managed, for example, to support Anabta Municipality in significantly reducing the non-revenue water, which we will also hear from Hashem Noor later on. And there were also mobile billing systems supported and implementing in Bethlehem and with Jerusalem Water Undertaking. Another component of the water program is wastewater management, which is mainly about the implementation of the bylaw for the wastewater house connections. And there were several achievements as well. For example, wastewater flow measurements, because there is a big discussion on wastewater from Palestine crossing the Green Line, which is then to be paid by the Palestinian Authority. Then there were agreements and trainings on wastewater as well. Still, of course, every reform process has big challenges ahead, and challenges are always also chances to focus on specific issues and to improve specific issues. There are, considering also the fragile environment in Palestine, there are no real models for a reform in such an environment, but it's a trial and error, and it can be very tedious, and it's never a linear process. It's a transformation process which is very complex, and as mentioned before, you have to adapt and react. So thank you very much. We continue now with the head of my partner organization, Mohammad Hmaidi, CEO of the Water Sector Regulatory Council.
Thank you very much, Liesa Sauerhammer from the GIZ Water Program in Palestine. I'd like to introduce Allow me to introduce Mr. Mohammad Hmaidi, CEO of the Water Sector Regulatory Council in Palestine.
Thank you. Good afternoon. May I start with two apologies to make. The first is the duplication of some information or pictures, but that was needed for the structuring of the presentation. And another apology for having the session so late, which was not my choice. A number of presenters and speakers this morning have talked about fragility and challenges. Therefore, I've structured my presentation into 4 areas. First, talk about fragility of the water sector in Palestine. What the Council is doing in such a fragile situation, the importance of improved service levels in such a situation, and what donors can do, and with few examples on water fragility in Palestine. As there is no unique definition for fragility, and as each country has its own characteristics, but in Palestine, fragility can be, as was said several times today, can be political, can be technical, and can be institutional. Our role as a council is not to tackle some of the political issues. That's the role of the Palestinian Water Authority, but we have a role in working with the fragile situation and try to improve and make the best use of that as much as we can. Again, we all recognize that economic regulation of services, especially water, is an important element for improving the efficiency, especially in fragile situations. Our approach is to build on the strengths of service providers and to learn from others. That's why in our performance reports, we concentrate not only on weaknesses, but try to show the strengths that or achievements that was made by any service provider and try to exchange that knowledge and experience among service providers. We have found that can be a useful tool for knowledge exchange among service providers. The presentation of success examples will be part of our future incentives program. As we are still at the early stages, our incentives will be based on presentation of the successes, not through a shameful list or through depriving from donation from donors. The presentation of success will be one of the most examples of our incentives program. To initiate dialogues not only between service providers, but also with other key stakeholders in the country, including NGOs or non-governmental organizations, civil society, whoever can have a role in that. The stakeholder engagements, that includes individuals, citizens, institutions, until the top of the government. The knowledge that we have gained, we are grateful to the continuous assistance from the GIZ and the World Bank. We were able to transfer knowledge from different countries where these two partners have established governance systems, regulatory systems, as well as good management examples. In our work in this fragile situation, we concentrate on how to service the poor. Even when we introduce, when I say we as Palestinian water sector, tools or systems, poor comes first. Stakeholder engagement will be always one of our policies, but at the same time, in improving the financial situation, the well-targeted subsidies is a key issue in our restructuring and reform of the system. The data availability is still, again, one of our key issues, that not only availability, but accuracy and good analysis. I don't need to go through how fragile the system is, but again, as I've said, some of these were mentioned before, but to take some of them as examples and see how the Council is trying to build its intervention through these challenges. When we take the first one, which is part of the Council mandate, that is all in the water law, which can be found in our website. We don't need to go through those, but when we take a challenge, like as was said several times by His Excellency the Minister this morning, and after that, that regardless of the fact that there is a political, occupational control over resources, but as a council, as a regulator, our role is to make best use of the available resource, to minimize losses through studies, through practices, through education, through knowledge exchange. That is where we concentrate our effort, is to how to minimize the non-revenue water, how to improve tariff, how to improve losses, how to improve financial systems. That list of interventions, we select what can be doable, achievable for each service provider. Again, there are, even within the same country, fragility is not the same between different service providers. It's true, it's different between countries. At the same time, it can be different between service providers. That's why our interventions sometimes can be different. Our benchmarks or targets can be different from one service provider to the other. Again, on the financial sustainability, most of the tariff structures in Palestine were, I wouldn't say approved, but at least proposed years back. None of them was based on accurate analysis of the cost or with the consideration of the full cost categories. That's why we have started not only surveying, but looking in details on the structure of these tariffs and try to adjust, again, taking the poor into consideration and taking the water availability into consideration. Consumer satisfaction, that is not only in Palestine, but that can be one of the fragility pictures all over the Arab world. But again, to establish the support consumer complaint system, it's not only under the council umbrella, but that is a demand is to be established within each service provider, and both are to be linked together so the voice of the consumer is heard, not only by his service provider, but also by regulator and other policy makers. This goes on and on how the council is trying to look into situation under fragile conditions. Is it important that, apology that this picture is repeated, but we found it a good one. How important that service provision is improved. Again, when you tackle fragility in water, it goes beyond that, because water challenges may lead to civil unrest, and that's not at all good in a region where we have enough political control, political conflict. So we believe that tackling the fragility issues or challenges might lead to peaceful, stable societies, which again can be a ground for much larger peace in the region. It improves the economic and livelihood opportunities at the individual households as well as the national level. It increases trust, and that is the whole need. Once we improve the trust between consumers and service providers, at least their willingness to pay is improved. The ability of service provider to collect his fees is improved. His ability to improve the system is improved, and that adds to the peaceful, stable society. Is there a role for developmental partners? Again, we always say that interventions should tackle the political level, technical level, as well as consumer level. Most of donors are trying to do that, but with variations in the importance of each intervention. We would say that in such fragile conditions,